I mentioned this.
Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories this hour. A manhunt is underway in Utah after conservative activist and Trump ally Charlie Kirk is shot dead on a university campus. 2 people detained are released with no links to the attack as Donald Trump calls the killing a dark moment for America. Qatar's Prime Minister says Benjamin Netanyahu, quote, kills any hope of freeing hostages after Israel strikes Hamas leaders in Doha, killing 6. Sheikh Mohammed says families were relying on ceasefire mediation and now see no other hope. Palestinians in Gaza City's Nasser district are deciding whether to stay or flee after Israel drops leaflets warning troops will take control. Hundreds of thousands are ordered to leave amid heavy fighting with Hamas, but with little safety or food elsewhere, options are dire. Seoul says President Donald Trump offers hundreds of South Korean workers arrested in a US immigration raid the chance to stay, but only one accepts. Officials add the overture delays a charter flight home by 1 day as both sides discuss a new visa category. Britain sacks its ambassador to the United States, Peter Mandelson, after revelations about his friendship with the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The Foreign Ministry says new messages show the depths and extent of Mandelson's ties to Epstein. Poland says that the United Nations Security Council is set to meet after Russian drones reportedly violated its airspace. The announcement follows an unprecedented operation in which NATO members and Poland shot down suspected Russian drones yesterday. Nepal's Gen Z protesters are backing former Chief Justice Sushila Karki as interim leader after deadly demonstrations forced the Prime Minister to quit. The 73-year-old, who made history in 2016 as Nepal's first female Chief Justice, is now the frontrunner to guide the country through crisis. NASA confirms it is blocking Chinese citizens with valid US visas from accessing its facilities, materials and networks. The move effectively bars them from working at America's top space research center as the US races to keep pace with China's growing space program. Now we start in the United States, where the manhunt for the killer of Charlie Kirk continues after the conservative political activist and author was shot on stage during an event at Utah Valley University. Authorities say only one individual is believed to have fired the fatal shot from a rooftop during Kirk's event at Utah Valley. The shooting has been described as a targeted attack on the Turning Point USA founder. 2 people who were temporarily detained in connection with the case have now been released, with officials confirming they have no current ties to the incident. The FBI and Utah Department of Public Safety continue their investigation. No arrests have been made so far, and authorities have warned the public to remain alert as the search continues. We have some further information from that developing story. The graphic video footage of the shooting has been circulating on social media, which shows Kirk collapsing in his chair after being hit in the neck and attendees fleeing in a panic. We are showing blurred video footage of that now, and videos have also emerged showing an individual running on a rooftop near the scene. Witnesses claim the person was dressed in all black, and authorities say Kirk was shot from around 200 yards, likely from a rooftop. Moreover, there is further footage coming and circulating social media which shows a man celebrating immediately after Kirk was shot at the university yesterday. The video circulated on X shows the individual pointing towards the shooter's location and cheering uncontrollably as the attack unfolded. Authorities have not commented on the man's identity or on his involvement. Okay, we are now joined by David K. Johnson, an American author, professor of criminal justice, journalism and law and political science at Rochester Institute of Technology. That's in New York in the United States. Thank you very much, David, for joining us. Before we discuss the event itself, David, we've just referred to some footage on social media that has been circulating. Of course, this is a highly politicized event. How much is social media playing in this assassination, whatever one is going to call it? Is it adding fuel to the fire in America's already dire politically divided situation?
Absolutely. This is a very dark day because of the public response to this. A few months ago, we had the elected leader of the Democratic Party in one chamber of the Minnesota legislature assassinated along with her husband, and we had two other Democrats who were shot but not killed. Not one word from the White House, no voices of concern about this from people who are strong supporters of Donald Trump. But this is being promoted by advocates for Trumpism as a very horrible event. Well, it is a horrible event, without question. But the nature, the one-sided nature of the response to this kind of totally inappropriate political violence is a deep indicator of how much Trumpism and the rise of a brand of modern Christianity that wraps itself in a Bible but promotes policies that are totally contrary to the Bible is overtaking America. We literally have pastors in America who say their flocks have told them, we don't want to hear this turn the other cheek, be charitable to the other person, give to the poor. We want Donald Trump's philosophy. Hit him in the face, hit him again, hit him hard. And that's at the core of what's going on in this response to the awful assassination of Charlie Kirk.
Of course, awful. David, now let's go a bit further into the event. Of course, this happened in the state of Utah. What more can you tell us about the state of Utah and its gun laws and why it might prove difficult for officers and people investigating this to find a perpetrator?
Well, I suspect law enforcement at the end of the day will find the shooter and they'll be brought to justice. But Utah is a very conservative state. It is no longer a majority Mormon or Latter-day Saints state. It's changed quite a bit in that regard. But you can't tie, I don't believe properly, geographic location to any ideology because every community has people of a wide variety of views. What you can reasonably speculate about is since Charlie Kirk said, well, having a few people killed every year is a price we have to pay for having the Second Amendment, that is the right to bear arms. That certainly, we will find out at the end of the day, motivated the shooter in some way, that the shooter felt they were giving Charlie Kirk his own medicine. And there are many people in the United States who justify these mass shootings of school children that happen again and again and again by saying, well, it's more important that we have a right to carry guns. And indeed, just 2 days ago, a court said that Florida's law that you cannot walk around with a gun on your hip or a rifle slung over your shoulder is unconstitutional, that everyone has a right to carry a loaded firearm anywhere they go under the Second Amendment. I think that's a bad misreading of the history of the Second Amendment, but it's an indication of where America is going, which is toward an armed society full of people who believe they have a right to carry loaded weapons and use them if they feel threatened.
Yes, and David, that leads me into my final question on this matter. What do you expect the response is going to be to this? Of course, this has been a hugely public case due to the notoriety of Kirk and his views. We've seen shootings that have happened in America before, but given the person who was killed here in such a public fashion, hundreds of people, and of course social media, those images have been spinning round that. Do you expect the government to act on this in a possible legal way whatsoever?
Yes, I think that you will see more removals of restrictions on guns, which the Constitution authorizes. It refers to well-regulated in the Second Amendment. I think you're going to see a further relaxation of those. I think you're going to see several more states pass laws that anyone can walk around carrying a gun. And the problem here is that while I find Charlie Kirk's views odious, he has every right to speak them, and I've always defended the right of people to do that. We're losing that in America. We're adopting a culture of, if you don't agree with me, we've got the right to kill you. And both left and right need to walk away from that and renounce that. And leaders, moral leaders like pastors, imams, rabbis, they need to be in the forefront of calling out this kind of immoral thinking that venerates guns over human lives.
David K. Johnson, do stay with us. We have a further development from the United States. The criminal trial of Ryan Routh, the man accused of attempting to assassinate US President Donald Trump at his Florida golf course, has opened with Routh representing himself. Routh has pleaded not guilty to 5 federal charges, including attempted assassination of a major presidential candidate. He faces a maximum sentence of life in prison. Prosecutors say Routh hid with a rifle near the 6th hole green at Trump International Golf Club in West Palm Beach on the 15th of September of last year. He apparently intended to kill the president. A Secret Service agent spotted him and opened fire, prompting Routh to flee without firing a shot. He was arrested later that day on a Florida highway. The trial begins a day after right-wing activist Charlie Kirk was shot dead at Utah Valley University. A jury of 7 women and 5 men will hear evidence following opening statements. The case is presided over by Judge Aileen Cannon, who also oversaw Trump's classified document case. Routh, who had an erratic personal history and unorthodox political views, will have his former public defenders serve as standby lawyers to help with logistics. We're once again joined by David K. Johnson to discuss this further. Of course, this trial comes at a time when political violence is at the front of everyone's mind, especially after yesterday's events, David. What can you tell us about the pattern of political violence in America? Of course, everyone's mind draws themselves to notorious cases such as JFK, such as Abraham Lincoln, where it has been rife in America. But what is the situation when it comes to political violence today, and how common is it in American society?
Well, it's a rare event in American society, without a question. Shootings are not. We have multiple shootings almost on a daily basis in this country. But political violence has been a part of America from before we were the United States of America. We have the provisions of the Second Amendment in large part because slave owners in the 1700s wanted to make sure they had weapons and could use them. So the current state of affairs is that we are not paying much attention to many of the shootings in the United States, even when they are clearly political in one nature or another, but we're focusing on a few events involving well-known people. And I think people probably have a distorted view of this. The only country in the world with the number of gun deaths that we have is us, the US. No other country has 1/10 of the level of gun deaths that we have in the United States. And in our country, you can buy a military-style assault rifle capable of firing many rounds in a minute. And at least in some states, notably Florida, under this new court decision, walk into a supermarket, walk into a school, walk down the street with it. That inevitably will lead to more political violence until we change the culture underneath this, and cultures take a long, long time to change.
Yes, and David, of course, this is the trial of a man. This incident occurred over a year ago. No, just under a year ago now, and it came aligned, of course, with that televised assassination attempt in Boulder. What do you believe is going to be the outcome of this case? Of course. And what have the precautions been since that have happened? We had 2 assassination attempts on the US president within the space of a month. How do you think the Secret Service and Donald Trump's security has changed since these events have happened?
Well, for a long time, the Secret Service had a reputation as this incredibly efficient, well-run operation, and that began to fall apart during an earlier administration when a number of Secret Service agents detailed overseas went to a bordello run by cartel drug gang members in Colombia. And we've since had a very insightful book by Carol Leonig of the Washington Post into a lot of the problems at the Secret Service. Now, we've increased Secret Service funds. At the same time, President Trump has withdrawn Secret Service protection for Democrats who had been receiving it from General Milley, the former head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who the Iranians have publicly targeted for assassination. So we're also seeing, unfortunately, the politicization of the Secret Service. But the underlying problem here is this idea that it's my way or the highway. The Speaker of the House in 1994, Newt Gingrich, and his deputy, Congressman Dick Armey, went around saying at the time, bipartisanship, that is cooperation and compromise between Republicans and Democrats, bipartisanship is a political term for date rape. And they rejected this. They adopted the idea it's our way or none at all. And that's a real core problem. And surveys show that Americans believe in compromise, they believe in negotiation, and they reject this my way or the highway approach.
Yes.
And yet, among the leadership, it's growing, Thomas.
Yes, David K. Johnson, do stay with us. We have some breaking reports coming in where US Vice President J.D. Vance will visit Utah to meet the family of Charlie Kirk. Vance was originally meant to travel to New York to mark the 24th anniversary of the September 11th, 2001 terror attacks with his wife Usha Vance. However, the pair will now visit Salt Lake City, Utah to pay respects to the family of Charlie Kirk. David, if you could you tell us a little bit about the relationship that Kirk had with the Trump administration?
Well, Charlie Kirk was a very entrepreneurial character. Started at a very young age creating Turning Point USA. He was clearly a competent manager. He built many, many followers. He raised enormous sums of money and funneled them to other young people he was trying to win over to the Republican Party. You have to admire his skill at doing that. I don't know who, if anyone, will step forward to replace him because the particular set of skills that he had are not widely distributed in the world. But his assassination certainly is not going to be the end of efforts by young conservatives to try and build a solid conservative movement that will last decades into the future. I do think it's significant that J.D. Vance is going to Utah over this assassination when he can go tomorrow, instead of going to 9/11 memorials today over the 3,000 people who were murdered by agents of Osama bin Laden. That tells you a lot about the priorities and interests of the Trump administration. And those priorities and interests are not about those 3,000 people. They're not about the nature of the kind of exterior threats the U.S. is facing. They are about exploiting this assassination for political gain.
David K. Johnson, thank you very much for your insight and taking the time to talk to us. Pleasure having you on the program. We now move over to Europe For our next story, where the United Nations Security Council is set to hold an emergency meeting at Poland's request after Russian drones violated Polish airspace. Poland, supported by its NATO allies, recently shot down the drones on Wednesday, marking the first instance of a NATO member firing at Russian unmanned aircraft during the Ukraine conflict began. Additional measures along the eastern border with Belarus and Ukraine have also been put in place, including limitations on small aircraft. Poland's president described the incident as a test by Russia to gauge Warsaw and NATO's response, stressing the need for global attention to the situation. Let's listen in to what he said.
Gotowi. Ta rosyjska prowokacja, jak panowie generałowie i nasi żołnierze doskonale zdają sobie sprawę, była niczym więcej tylko próbą testowania naszych zdolności. Zdolności, że podziękować, bo wszystkie te testy zdaliśmy. I test polityczny, i test partnerski w ramach Sojuszu Północnoatlantyckiego, wykonując od nocy swoje zadania dyplomatyczne, a przede wszystkim test wojskowy, waszej gotowości do tego, aby na rosyjską prowokację zareagować. Dlatego...
In response, Polish authorities have imposed strict airspace restrictions until December the 9th. General aviation can fly during the day with radios and transponders, but night flights are now banned. Commercial aircraft can fly above 3 kilometers, while civilian drones are completely prohibited. Only military and unidentifiable civilian flights following a flight plan are now permitted. Okay, we have a related development coming up where NATO Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, Alexis Grenenchowicz, said today that the alliance does not know yet whether the Russian drones violated Poland's airspace intentionally. Let's listen in to his comments.
We do not yet know if this was an intentional act or an unintentional act. And I would also have low confidence in any numbers that you've heard of the number of drones. These are the number of sensors that we have, overlapping tracks. As we try to account for that and go into the technical details, we'll get a better understanding of how many there were. But I would not be able to tell you with any confidence today that it was 20 or that it was 10. We just have to get into the technical details to just figure that out, to debrief the crews that were up, see what they saw, etc.
We are now joined by Mark Sutherland. He is a geopolitical commentator and he joins us live from London to discuss this developing situation. Mark, thank you very much for joining us. It's been over 24 hours since this has happened, Mark. It was 19 encroachments into Polish airspace that were reported from Russian drones. There you hear that people are saying that it has not confirmed whether the cross was intentional. What have you made of the response by Poland and its allies since this event has occurred?
Good to join you again, Thomas.
Pleasure.
As your report has quite rightly said, the NATO are turning around and going, we wait for figures, we wait to be able to actually have conversations with our crews, with our pilots that have been up in the air to find out how many had incurred. Also, as you quite rightly pointed out in regard to the reports, whether is this Russia, was this deliberate, to then do a stress test on NATO, find out what their response is going to be. And also, as Poland has said, they then said we need Article 4. We need to have a discussion about this incursion, and as you rightly said, because of the border with Russia, and then there is a much history to then discuss in regard to the Second World War and in regard to moving of borders. And it's not surprising that people get twitchy. It's not surprising that people are twitchy with the fact that this theatre, sadly, this theatre of war that you and I have discussed over a number of weeks is continuing. Was it deliberate? Was it a mistake? That is what is to play out. Plus, we've seen what's happened in Alaska, and Putin, he needs to come to the table and discuss stopping this. And that's the deep frustration, because suddenly these kinds of actions then say, is he stress testing? Is he actually provoking us? what is actually going on. And Thomas, in many ways, through all the chatter, through all the reports that's going on there, it at times is very hard to give an instant answer, as that the NATO leader said. I need to have time to debrief my pilots and staff. Thomas.
Yes, Mark. Well, we do have a Russian response where Russia has dismissed Polish and Western statements about its drones entering Polish airspace, calling them nothing new and saying it will make no further comment on the incident. As per latest statements given by Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, the Russian Defense Ministry has already issued a statement and there was nothing more to add. He also noted that consultations were offered if necessary, but Moscow would not respond to new allegations. Responding to Western claims that Russia intended to stoke tensions, Peskov said Warsaw's rhetoric reflects a pattern seen across most European capitals recently. Mark, what are your thoughts on this? Russia has dismissed both Polish and Western statements about this situation. He's called them nothing new and has offered no more on the incident. How do you think the Kremlin is feeling about the response that NATO and, of course, Europe as a whole is giving about this incident?
If you go through sort of press releases and, as people would call it, the propaganda on the Russian side, this kind of reaction is nothing new at all. If they have deliberately gone into Polish airspace, we'll just leave it like that. If that is then proven, no, they are not going to say anything. What is sad, Thomas, as you and I have discussed before, is a few weeks ago there was a meeting of Ukrainian officials and Russian officials in Turkey, 45-minute meeting to discuss the prisoner swaps. Since then, there is this effort to actually get them to the table. There seems a resistance, as we are seeing constant drone strikes, say on both sides, that are going on. We need them round the table. We need a stopping of the war. We need a peace deal. We need an ending to this. With Russia has lost a million men. Ukraine has lost hundreds of thousands of men as well, let alone all the devastation in Ukraine, etc. So we need them to come to the table. Russia may then decide we'll send some more drones. How serious is Europe in responding to us? How united is NATO? How united are all the other countries that are then part of NATO? And just finally on this point, history, as I say, history is not destined to repeat itself, but it rhymes, which is that classic phrase. But the problem is that this is what people are then looking at. We are then looking at in regard to Russian behavior. We go back to the Second World War, we go back to the Cold War. It's not surprising that people then have those feelings and this particular reaction, especially with the history of Poland and what they then went through the Second World War. As I say, we're involving human lives. We need people to come to the table and stop this as soon as possible. Thomas.
Yes, Mark, do stay with us. We have some updates coming from Britain, where Britain has sacked Peter Mandelson as US ambassador over his relationship with late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Mandelson has come under scrutiny over his relationship with the late sex offender after a birthday book was released, which allegedly included a letter from him describing Epstein as his best pal. Mandelson has since said that he deeply regrets meeting Epstein and had carried on that association for longer than he should have done. Prime Minister Starmer had earlier backed Mandelson over this statement in Parliament. Let's take a listen in.
Mr. Speaker, as she and the House would expect, full due process was followed during this appointment, as it is with all ambassadors. The ambassador has repeatedly expressed his deep regret. He is right to do so. He is now playing an important part in the US-UK relationship.
Further emails have since been published in the media showing that Mandelson had advised Epstein to fight for early release when he faced charges over soliciting a minor. The Foreign Ministry has now announced that in the light of the new information, Prime Minister Starmer has asked the Foreign Secretary to withdraw Mandelson as the ambassador to the United States. Mark, this comes as the Starmer government goes through a major rebrand and a major reshuffle in terms of its cabinet. And then another loss, Mandelson, a hugely important piece of Starmer's government who we saw Donald Trump stand next to when he was signing that trade deal with the United States. How much is this appointment going to damage Starmer's credibility in an already losing position that he is in regards to the British public?
Well, without sounding too cynical, but it's true, if you go back through Mandelson's history, then if you had any common sense, you would never have appointed the man in the first place, because this is a man that has the celebratory of being thrown out of the Blair government, Blair cabinet twice over 2 incidences. This is a man also that seems to once he's around people with money and power, he then forgets how he should behave and should he have anything to do with these people. The credibility, Thomas, frankly, I think has already been lost with a number of other issues, but we won't have time to discuss those. But the credibility is lost because, as you quite rightly point out, of Mandelson's relationship with Epstein. Then emails are released, other information is then released. And this is not good at all. Mandelson yesterday was on an internet channel out of Washington going, I apologize, I realize I shouldn't have had any relationships with this particular individual. And frankly, the reason why then he is gone, it was raised in the Commons in Westminster Parliament yesterday by the Conservative opposition leader, Kemi Badenoch, who then afterwards people discussed and said she certainly skewered for once, which was good for her, Starmer for once on a particular issue, and it's the appointing of this individual. We have a problem. We then have a problem of who we are then appointing to do very, very important jobs. Can they actually do the job? What about their history? What about their credibility? And Starmer has now been caught out with his trousers down, frankly, on this issue, and should have taken the advice that most probably some people may have given him, which was to never have gone through Mandelson in the first place. But I'll end with this: the point most probably was to get him over there, thinking that he could then wine and dine and smooze the Trump administration. But before he came, there were 1 or 2 people who are very wise to these things, and the Trump administration raising the fact that Mr.
Yes.
Mandelson has a past and he has relationships with people that are questionable. Thomas.
Mark Sutherland, thank you very much for joining us. Always a pleasure to talk to you. We now move on and over to South Asia, where tensions flared for the second day outside the Nepali Army headquarters in Badarakali as Gen Z protesters remained divided over who should lead the interim government. Rival factions supporting former Chief Justice Shinshula Karki and Kathmandu Mayor Balan Shah clashed outside the army complex, while supporters of Dharan Mayor Harka Sampang also joined the fray. The protests, sparked by a short-lived social media ban and long-standing grievances over corruption, nepotism and unemployment, have left over 30 people dead and forced the escape of more than 13,500 prisoners nationwide. We have further news coming out of Nepal. Meanwhile, the president of the country, Ramchandra Pudel, said that he is working to end the crisis that has hit the Himalayan nation after deadly protests this week removed the Prime Minister and left Parliament in flames. He further asked all parties to remain confident that a solution is being sought quickly to address the demands of the protesting citizens. Okay, that is all that we have time for, but we will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world.